Hello, everybody. Welcome again. Episode 57 of Kopi Chats with Waylin. Me, your host. I've done a lot of preparation for today's show. I hope that you enjoy. Today's special show is focus on Russia, Ukraine and Russia. Russia is the big topic today. I hope you like. Now, before that, yesterday I was talking about Canada, the country formerly known as Canada. I showed a news report about a lady who was knocked over, trampled even by some horses. And here's the original video. I'd like to show it to everyone real quick.
Oh, come on through. Come on through. What is happening here? Wow, what is this lady doing? Trampling horses. Trampling. Stop it. Stop it. Look. Oh my God. They just trampled this lady. They just trampled that lady.
That is from the country formerly known as Canada. Absolute wackiness. And you could see that someone who fell down, who was wearing a red jacket and appears to be, in a mobility scooter. Same as the news piece that I shared yesterday. This lady was interviewed later. Her name is Candy Cerro, and she's from the Mohawk tribe, and she actually was in the hospital. It appears to be for a injury to her shoulder. The Ottawa police denied that this happened, but now you've seen the video evidence for it. Now, one last video that I saw that I felt, wow, really put things into perspective, still about Canada, is this one. Have a watch.
The news coming out of India about the protests by farmers. The situation is concerning, and we're all very worried about family and friends. I know that's the reality for many of you. Let me remind you, Canada will always be there to defend the right of peaceful protest. We believe in the importance of dialogue, and that's why we've reached out through multiple means directly to the Indian authorities to highlight our concerns. Individuals are trying to blockade our economy, our democracy, and our fellow citizens' daily lives. It has to stop. The news.
Ooh. And that's really as chilling as it gets. You can see, in the one hand, support for the right of peaceful protest, which I think anyone can get behind, whatever country you're from. I believe even if you live in Iran, people would agree with the right to of a peaceful protest. Okay, I can't say for sure, but it would feel that most of the world, the right of peaceful protest is something that people would generally agree with, and so did Mr. Trudeau, up until he had peaceful protests in his capital. The only thing that I have seen that does not appear to be peaceful is the police action to respond to the protests. Of course, dear viewer, you will say, and I'm sure some of you will say, but Waylin, you only showed us videos of the police being badly behaved, but surely they were provoked. I concede it's possible. I concede it's possible, and I'm open to seeing these videos, evidence for the contrary. I just haven't happened to see them. That might be due to my media choices. I'm on Twitter a lot, and I reckon that Twitter is the kind of place where you're much more likely to see the videos that I share. But, if you know of this, if you know of the opposite story, you have videos of people beating up the police, by all means, please share it with me. Leave it in the comment below. Tell me what to search for in Google, and I'll look for it. Right? Otherwise, please be aware. This is exactly the kind of thing that we should be seeing, but we do not, because we will never see this in our newspapers. We will not see this in our media outlets. It's just a shame. But, dear viewer, you already are what, the top 1% most informed people in your community, nay, in your country, just by watching this show. Congratulations. Welcome to my world. All right, moving on. Look at this. In yesterday's news, actually, Malaysia is not opening government office in Afghanistan, according to the Foreign Ministry, Foreign Ministry of Malaysia, I reckon. Malaysia is not opening any government office in Afghanistan, its Foreign Affairs Ministry said. The clarification came after photos of a meeting between Afghanistan's acting Foreign Affairs Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi and Mr. Ahmad Azam Abdul Rahman, Special Advisor on Afghanistan to Malaysia's Foreign Minister Saifuddin Abdullah. What do you think when you first see this piece of news? Would you think, man, those Malaysian officials are really a bunch of crackpots, insane people. How could they speak to the Taliban, of all people? How could they do such a thing? That's just unacceptable. If you thought that, that's okay, which it is something entirely normal, and most people feel exactly the same way. But let me put it to you, let me invite you to look at it through a different pair of lenses, which is to think, isn't this exactly what you call leadership? The Taliban is in power in Afghanistan. It's not in question. They haven't harmed anybody that we know of so far. In this period, where they are newly in power, they have little to no international support, and they're at their so-called most vulnerable, you might say, most vulnerable to friendship, diplomacy, and most likely to respond kindly to kind gestures from friends overseas. Is this not the time to build a relationship and nudge them gently down the path, towards being accepted into the international community? Is that not leadership? With that in mind, would you not say that this is exactly the correct move, courageous, and taking a step forward where nobody else dares to? And what more, there is no cost to this. This is, some would say, this is free money. You see, money is basically picking up money on the ground as you walk past. And not everybody can see this, but credit to Mr. Saifuddin Abdullah and his team at the Foreign Ministry. This is exactly the kind of thing that forward-thinking foreign ministry officials should be doing. And I give credit for this. I praise this. I think it's good. Now, it is entirely possible that after this, the Taliban does things that nobody wants to be associated with. Possible, but you can always withdraw your support. But before that, isn't this the perfect time to say, hey, extend the hand, shake their hand, say, why don't you join us? Let's work together, and we'll get you some trade going so you can rebuild your country. We'll guide, be your friend as you move towards being a upstanding member of the international community. Is this not what we want? Right? So kudos. This is leadership. And this is not the first time as well. I mean, for all Malaysia's many problems, Malaysia's very good on being fairly neutral in the Cold War. As I remember it, Dr. Mahathir, former Prime Minister, founded what was called the Non-Aligned Movement, which was a grouping of countries that decided we will not align either with the West, led by the United States, or the communist states led by the Soviet Union. The non-aligned movement was to remain neutral, and that they did fairly well. I mean, it's reasonably, I would say, from my experience, living in Malaysia, it neither felt that we were close to the Soviet Union, which we weren't, and or neither extremely close to the United States, which we weren't. So this is furthering an outstanding tradition in foreign relations that Malaysia has got going. So enough about that. I also want to move on to the next thing. Okay, big news, everybody. You may have already heard from all different sources that Russian troops are to be sent to this place with a funny name called the Donbass. First reported on Channel News Asia. Let's see what is said. Expand to read the full story. The United States took a wait-and-see attitude to President Vladimir Putin's order for Russian troops to deploy in separatist areas of Ukraine, saying that the talks remain possible until the tanks roll. President Joe Biden imposed sanctions on 2 Russian-backed areas in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region. But a senior U.S. official declined to characterize whether Putin's order for Russian armed forces to conduct peacekeeping there counts as an invasion. So they say, we're going to assess what Russia has done. Russian troops moving in Donbass would not be a new step, said the officials. We'll continue to pursue diplomacy until the tanks roll. So this is the huge news. This is the biggest news in the world right now. And coming right after wasn't there some winter games? Winter sports? Some kind of sports festival. And right after it's done, wow, straight away. What do you know? Big change. It's almost like there's something, there was some, it all seems like coordinated. Oh. But anyway, this seems like a very cautious stance, right? President Biden saying, oh yeah, this is really bad. I know, but talks are possible. We won't say no until the tanks roll. Now, I feel that President Joe Biden's response has been a little bit strange. Early on, he was loudly proclaiming that war was imminent. Wars will come anytime. And in particular, February 16th was pitched by his administration as this day of, projected day of start of war, which came and went with no issue whatsoever. In fact, that led to a comment from President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, who said, called on West not to create panic amid the buildup of Russian troops on his borders. He told reporters that warnings of an imminent invasion were putting Ukraine's economy at risk. This was 28th January. So it's been a fairly, it's been nearly a month ago. And nearly a month ago, U.S. President Joe Biden said he believed Russia could attack its neighbor next month. So that's been Joe Biden's theme. He's been saying, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Whereas all along, President Zelensky has been saying, whoa, cool down. This is not imminent. Whoa, stop doing that because, you're hurting my country's economy. Because obviously, if with imminent war, what happens? People will shut down their businesses. They'll move away. They'll, take out their savings from the bank. They'll stop doing business as usual. What does that happen? The people lose their jobs. Businesses don't run. You can't buy things. People run away. All these terrible things happen. So, was it the case that President Zelensky, he had exceptional insight into what the Russian government was thinking, Vladimir Putin was thinking? Not necessarily, it's not evident at all, but on the other hand, even if he knew, that there was an invasion and it looked extremely likely, what's the best thing to do? Would it be to say that, oh no, you're in crisis mode, everybody prepare, drop everything that you're doing, stop all the economic activity, because that feels like the worst possible response. And I don't take credit for this. What I feel is this really insightful opinion. It came from Scott Adams, a famous commentator, political commentator, and creator of the Dilbert cartoon. So he said regardless of the situation, President Zelensky might just be making the best move available to him, which is to say we have to continue as normal. Because if I stop everything, then Russia has gained an advantage, just by moving its troops around in their own territory. They disrupted Ukraine by doing nothing, and they just disrupted Ukraine by patrolling around in their own territory. And said that's the worst possible outcome. So the very minimum is that you have to force them to do something. If they want to disrupt Ukraine, force them to cross the border into Ukraine, enter Ukraine, and stir things up. Because you do not want to give an advantage where they get to disrupt you without even entering your territory. That's the worst possible outcome. So it's entirely understandable. But then, of course, President Joe Biden had no intention of playing along with that position. Instead, President Joe Biden was the one who continually told everybody that war is coming, invasion's imminent, and that's what he's been saying all this time. Okay, let me move on. Looky here, on the Sydney Morning Herald, it's reported Putin is testing how far he can push us all. U.S. tells Ukraine crisis talks. I've reported just today. The U.S. ambassador to UN has dismissed as nonsense President Putin's announcement that he's putting Russian troops in separatist areas of eastern Ukraine as peacekeepers, saying their presence is clearly the basis for Russia's attempt to create a pretext for a further invasion of Ukraine. U.S. ambassador to UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield told the United Nations, that this is clearly the basis for Russia's attempt to create a pretext for further invasion. So you're gonna, it's just an excuse. It's just an excuse. There's absolutely no basis in reality for wanting to put peacekeepers in eastern Ukraine. So let's see. Thomas Greenfield told an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council that Putin's earlier announcement that Russia would recognize the Lugansk and Donetsk areas as independent states were also an unprovoked attack on Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. By his actions, she said, Putin has torn the Minsk Agreement to shreds. Thomas Greenfield said Putin has put before the world a choice, and it must not look away, because history tells us that looking the other way in the face of such hostility will be a far more costly path. Tensions are high, and I think that's very clearly true. The US accuses Russia of deploying up to 150,000 troops near Ukraine's borders for an invasion. Russia has denied that it wants to invade Ukraine and accuses the West of hysteria. So there is something rather confusing here. This conflict goes all the way back to, as I understand it, 2014, when Russian troops entered Crimea. Crimea is a southeastern part of Ukraine. And why did they do so? Allegedly, they were invited by paramilitary forces there, saying, we need your help. We're being attacked. We're being, oppressed by Ukrainian government forces there, and so the Russian government responded by agreeing to support the independence fighters, who wanted to stop the oppression that they were facing. And the Western government say, well, Russia, you sent your troops in. Russia says, no, it's not our troops. We're just supporting the people who already live there. And that has been the situation up until now. Crimea is still in that situation. Now, this led to subsequent, or this not led to, but perhaps, subsequent to this, people in other parts of Ukraine called Lugansk and Donetsk also seem to have their own rebellion, unrest, where they wanted to form their own government. They felt that they were being oppressed or bullied or attacked by the Ukrainian state, and they wanted to also be protected, have the protection of Russia, have the support of Russia to counter these the horrible oppression is what they would say. And Russia, until now, has been mulling their response, right? It appears to be that, oh, should we help them? Should we do it? Should we involve ourselves? And they've had moving troops around the border with Ukraine, which incidentally, the Russian border is closest to Lugansk and Donetsk, the two places where peacekeepers have currently been sent. So it all appears to be consistent with what Russian President Putin has said. That is, there's trouble there, there's a lot of disturbance, and we need to have some peace. We need to calm things down, so we're sending in peacekeepers. So that is the status quo so far. Now, President Zelensky has been saying, no, there's not an imminent invasion, but clearly, he did not really address, as far as I understand, he didn't address the unrest that appeared to be happening in those regions. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Ukrainian President Zelensky earlier accused Russia of wrecking peace efforts and ruled out making any territorial concessions in an address to the nation on Tuesday. Earlier, after chairing a meeting of Security Council, Zelensky accused Russia of violating Ukrainian sovereign territory and said it could mean Moscow pulling the plug on peace talks aimed at ending the separatist conflict in eastern Ukraine. So yes, indeed, as you can see, the separatist conflict is exactly what it means, that there are people who want to break away from Ukraine. Zelensky said he wants to solve the crisis through diplomacy, but that his country was ready to dig in for the long haul. We won't cede anything, said a defiant Zelensky. So this is it feels like this is getting very, very serious. Very, very, very serious. Reuters witness saw columns of military vehicles, including tanks, on the outskirts of Donetsk. There are about 5 tanks in a column on the edge of the city and 2 more in another part of town. No insignia were visible, so the reporter could not tell who these tanks belong to, but the appearance of the tanks came hours after Putin signed friendship treaties with the 2 separatist regions and ordered Russian troops deploy on what Moscow called a peacekeeping operation. So that's very concerning, as you already saw in the earlier report that saying that Joe Biden had stated that diplomacy is an option until the tanks roll. So let's see. There's a little map here by Sydney Morning Herald showing that, yes, red and white circles represent Russian troops. There are red and white. Red are new units, and white are those stationed permanently. You can see that there are plentiful red dots showing that many military units have been moved recently around Ukraine. And you may observe that Ukraine is surrounded pretty much on all, easily 50% of its borders. If you consider Belarus a close Russian ally, which I believe is entirely reasonable because all these Russian troops are in Belarus surrounding Ukraine, then Ukraine is at extreme risk. I would just say risk, because this is a pretty indefensible situation, it would appear. I mean, I'm not a military strategist, but it looks like, just from the encirclement of the country, that it'll be an extremely difficult situation, right? Let's see. What else is there? So, of course, we can expect sanctions. Let's see. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson agreed Britain and the EU will coordinate to deliver swift sanctions against Putin's regime and stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. There we go. Earlier on Tuesday, Putin signed a decree recognizing the 2 breakaway regions as independent entities. In a lengthy televised address, Putin, looking visibly angry, described Ukraine as an integral part of Russia. Sweeping through more than a century of history, he painted today's Ukraine as a modern construct that is inextricably linked to Russia. He charged that Ukraine had inherited Russia's historic lands and after the Soviet collapse was used by the West to contain Russia. He brushed off Western warnings that such a step would be illegal and kill off peace negotiations, and he was confident the Russian people would support his decision. Yes. So that is actually something that I want to point out, and which I will get to. There is a historical case for Ukraine being part of Russia, but I will move on and we will get to that. All right, just put that on ice for a moment. Now, President Zelensky must be the most stressed person on earth right now. His hair still looks black, but it may not stay that way for long. So here it's reported that President Zelensky viscerally condemned the leaders of European states, the United Nations, the West generally for their selfishness, self-confidence, and irresponsibility during a speech in Munich this weekend. I reckon that means a few days ago. Zelensky told those assembled at Munich Security Conference that the Russian invasion of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula and participation in the ongoing war in Donbass had been met for nearly a decade with indifference that results in complicity, and more than that, karma would soon consume those who did not help his country against Moscow. Zelensky emphasized the length of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, 8 years, longer than the entirety of World War II, in response to breathless predictions from the administration of President Joe Biden and European countries that Russia would imminently invade Ukraine. That invasion already happened, Zelensky insisted, calling into question the sudden panic that has gripped Western leaders and corporate media about the situation in that country. Very, 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 very true and very, very pertinent, right? Because, yes, it says here Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. Back then, Joe Biden was already in the White House. He was already there as vice president, no doubt. But we did. I don't remember hearing, a big deal of controversy about that. I mean, granted, there was controversy, but at no point did it seem that anybody was going to war over this. So what changed, right? That is a valid question. What changed? What is the difference now? Biden officials insisted following Biden's comments that the Russian invasion was imminent, presumably a different invasion one already taking place, baffling Zelensky's administration and severely damaging the Ukrainian economy. Exactly. This is a big deal, because continually harping on the fact that invasion's imminent weakens the very country that you are trying to protect, right? So I don't understand the purpose of that. Now, again, there is a point of view, and again, I'm quoting from Scott Adams, that says, well, perhaps this is negotiation, right? You talk up this crisis and you continually harp on it, making all the noise you can, bring all the attention in the world onto it. And what happens then, right? Because you're saying that, hey, look, this bully is about to bully someone, right in front of us. And what happens? Well, we all see the bully as Vladimir Putin, and he has a tough guy reputation. So if you have a tough guy reputation, you're in this situation where everybody expects you to follow through on your tough guy reputation, and then somebody whom you don't respect, starts calling you out and saying, look, this guy's about to do something terrible. Watch him. If he dares do anything, that will be the end of it for all. We have to fight him back, and everybody's watching. And that if you follow through, yes, as Putin, if you follow through with what it looks like you're about to do, everybody's going to come and beat you up, or at least ignore you. You'll be outcast. Do you still follow through? So if nobody was paying attention, maybe it's easier for you to do what you wanted to do, which may involve invading Ukraine. But with everyone's eyes on you, could you still follow through with that? Right? I think it's a legitimate question. And so perhaps this was actually a very intelligent move by Joe Biden. He knew that he would damage the Ukrainian economy, but perhaps the calculation was that, well, you can suffer some economic damage, but if you lose the land you're standing on, then you've lost totally, right? So what's the better option here? And it looks like yeah, there it just may be a situation where each party has a very different idea of what is acceptable, where the lines are, where the red lines are, the lines that you do not cross. Where are they? And they're responding accordingly to what they feel it is. Now, here, speaking of I want to talk a little bit about the history of Russia and Ukraine. About 16 hours ago, President Putin did a televised address. He was on the Russian National Security Council. He assembled the Russian National Security Council, had his foreign minister and other people around, and they all delivered their address. Had their meeting in front of television cameras for the whole country to see. And there is this, I really respect this Twitter account called Russians with Attitude, which is a podcast, and they actually transcribe some of the things said by President Putin over here, and I just want to take you through it. Here, Putin to address the nation 5 minutes, Zelensky to assemble the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine at the same time. The address seems to be postponed half an hour, blah, blah, blah. Alright, Putin's address to the nation is on. Historically, the inhabitants of the southwestern regions have called themselves Russian and Orthodox. We think this is self-evident. Okay, Putin's words. Modern Ukraine was completely and utterly created by the Bolsheviks. This process began immediately after the revolution of 1917. Lenin and his comrades did this in a manner which was very rough on Russia proper, by cutting off a historical part of its territory. He's elaborating on Stalin and Khrushchev cutting off parts of Russia, creating Soviet Ukraine. Putin elaborating on the Bolsheviks compromising with Ukrainian nationalists to create the chimera of Ukraine. Nothing you haven't heard on our episode on Ukrainian history. I actually spent some time listening to that, and it's very comprehensive. Why did communists make such generous presents to the minority nationalists? This makes no sense. It is insane, but there's an explanation. After the revolution, the main goal of the Bolsheviks was to stay in power by any means necessary. Leninist principles of nation building weren't just a mistake. They were worse than a mistake. This became extremely obvious in 1991. So it appears that there were some Leninist principles of nation building. How does this help? I'm sorry, I don't really understand how it helps the Bolsheviks to stay in power. It might have had something to do with, and I'm speculating, totally guessing. You create a new country called Ukraine, as the Soviet Union did actually seem to create a bunch of countries, and together they called themselves the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And you could, fairly accurately just call that whole union Russia, the Soviet Union. But there were actually different countries, and as I understand it, each of them had a vote on the United Nations General Assembly. Now, granted, all of them were pretty close to Moscow, and you might even consider them the same country. But after the fall of communism, what happened was that, each of them gained their independence, and they have exercised that independence to varying degrees. Now, what happened is that, so now a lot of Ukrainian territory, which in the past was considered Russian territory, is Ukrainian. And the nation building of, all these Soviet socialist republics, which were not done very well, was worse than a mistake. It weakened Russia. Became extremely obvious in 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union. We cannot change the past, but we have to speak about it openly and honestly, quoting Putin. Ukraine was completely built and created by Lenin. He was its architect, including his orders on including Donbass in the Ukrainian Soviet Republic by force. This was also mentioned in the podcast. So it seemed that Lenin decided arbitrarily, this is what Ukraine will look like. These are the territories that will come under the nation of Ukraine, right? Now the Ukrainians destroy Lenin monuments and want decommunization. You want decommunization? We can show you what real decommunization means in Ukraine. The destructive fantasies of Leninist nation building were never removed from the judicial basis of Soviet and post-Soviet statehood. And yes, you can see a hint of that here. Leninist nation building and everything that entailed were never removed from the judicial basis of Soviet and post-Soviet statehood. So from the transition from between Soviet statehood to post-Soviet statehood, everything was a total mess, and whatever legal basis there was for what existed before and what came after were never sorted out properly. Instead of a deep analysis of the situation and political transformation, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union engaged only in verbal diarrhea about the reconstruction of Leninist national politics, supporting local nationalism. Yes, this basically sounds absolutely terrible. Now, the Ukrainian nationalists claim to have conquered independence for Ukraine, but in reality it was strategic and historical mistakes by Soviet leadership that led to this. Yes, I see. The Russian people accepted a new geopolitical reality and materially supported new states with respect for Ukraine's sovereignty. Putin explaining how Russia pumped $250 billion into Ukraine after 1991 and paid off all Soviet foreign loans instead of them being shared by all ex-Soviet republics. I understand. Of course, it does not mean that I accept it as true, merely that I understand the claim that Russia has been very, very generous with the former Soviet republics, paying off all their Soviet foreign loans and pumping a lot of investment into countries like Ukraine. In fact, I'm not sure if you're aware of this. You may remember that there was a Chernobyl nuclear accident in the past, and that is in Ukraine. And of course, who ran that? Well, was the Soviet Union. They built this on Ukrainian soil instead of Russian soil, even though it's a Soviet project. So obviously, it was all treated as one big family, one big entity. And it does not appear that Soviet Union distinguished that specifically, between different entities within it. Russia has always cooperated with Ukraine with friendship and respect. The Ukrainian government since 1991 has always treated its relation with Russia in the sense that it had all the rights and privileges but none of the obligations, up to and including the literal theft of gas. Oh, that sounds really awful. And that's something that will come, I will show you an article about, which is the natural gas situation. From its first steps, the Ukrainian state had built up its nation in opposition to Russia, distorting the historical understanding of millions of people. This explains why neo-Nazis have so much power in Ukraine. Putin explaining how Ukraine is controlled by oligarchs and the European choice of Ukraine means nothing but selling out the country to foreigners to save stolen money. Putin explaining how nationalist radicals have used to justify displeasure of the people with the corrupt government to stage a bloody coup supported by Western money. Ukrainian cities were drowned in the wave of pogroms and violence, remembering the events in Odessa when peaceful protesters were viciously burned alive. The criminals who did this were never punished. We know their names and we will do everything to punish them. Talking about how the Ukrainian government drove the economy into the ground, destroying the most productive region in historical Russia. Ukraine has been historically very productive. It's also known as the breadbasket of Europe. Plenty of grain, wheat, agriculturally extremely productive, and also contains natural gas. Putin explaining how Ukraine has sold out the country to the West and allows Western NGOs to control all aspects of law and order. Alright, you're fighting corruption, but what are the results? Corruption is even worse now than it was before. And I've read this elsewhere that Ukraine is in fact known as one of the extremely corrupt country. Extremely corrupt. And that is a major problem for the country. So this would not be a new accusation to anybody who's been following Ukraine. Do they understand that Ukraine isn't even an economic protectorate but a literal colony? Well, speaking of referring to Ukraine as a colony of the West. The Ukrainian parliaments continue to discriminate against Russians. The politics of de-Russification continue. The Russian language is being persecuted. So there is a Russian language and there's also a Ukrainian language. And my understanding, after listening to a little bit of Ukrainian history, just out of interest, is that Russian has been spoken in Ukraine very extensively in the past. And the Ukrainian language has not been something that the whole Ukraine speaks. Russian has been generally the common language, with Ukrainian starting off as some kind of peasant language that people speak far to the west of Ukraine, and gradually taking on more and more importance. If I'm not mistaken, some Ukrainian was really something that began to be spoken towards the end of the 1700s, and before that, it's basically just Russian everywhere. And only with the campaigns of de-Russification, to build up a Ukrainian national identity, has that really come into the focus. So, Putin explaining how Ukraine is sending terrorists into Crimea and cooperating with Islamist terrorist organizations. Ukraine is planning on arming itself with nuclear weapons. That assertion sounds very serious. We cannot react to this. We cannot not react to this real danger, especially since Western powers would support Ukraine acquiring these weapons to create even more danger for Russia. The Ukrainian military and intelligence service are being controlled by Western powers. Putin explaining how Ukraine is an open playground for NATO military forces that can and are being used for actions against Russia. Okay, so I think that's enough. I will not proceed further, but you can see that whether or not you believe what is said here, it gives a very different perspective on the situation. Extremely different. Now, prior to this, we only ever hear one side, which is, what President Joe Biden says, or Germany says, or President Emmanuel Macron from France says, and we'll talk about the aggression from Russia. We'll talk about, their posturing and, how evil Vladimir Putin is, without ever knowing his justification. Like, why does he do what he wants to do, right? And this, even if you don't believe a single thing that Putin says, I think it would be useful, rational, to at least look at his stated reasons why he says that it is important to him to do what he wants to do. And here we have that, right, for the first time, transcribed by our excellent friends at Russians with Attitude, which I strongly recommend. So, let me just take a small step back to a few days ago. A few days ago, Ukraine and rebel, region trade shelling allegations. So Ukraine and Russia accused each other of shelling cities. Let me see. The Ukrainian military's command center in the east alleged that Russian-backed forces fired heavy artillery at a village with special cynicism. The shells hit a kindergarten. Yeah, that's absolutely... It sounds absolutely horrendous, right? Because you hit a kindergarten? What happened to the children? Ukraine's President Zelensky called this a big provocation. For its part, the Kremlin said Moscow was seriously concerned about reports of an escalation after separatists accused government forces of opening fire on their territory 4 times in the past 24 hours. British Foreign Secretary says that this is straight out of the Kremlin playbook. This is they're just making something up to fabricate a pretext for invasion. Ukraine's foreign minister did not mention any injuries but condemned the alleged shelling. So where's the Russian? Oh, let's see. Russia says. Let's see. What did Russia say? Russia said extremely concerned about escalation after separatists accused government forces of opening fire on their territory. So the separatists, supported by Russia, accused government forces of opening fire on their territory. So it appears to be that they're not denying that they did the shelling, but that it is in response to what the Ukrainian government forces did. Russian news agencies reported that separatist forces in Lugansk claimed the Ukraine military escalated fighting. So yes, they're blaming the Ukrainian military for starting things. 34 incidents were reported. Simmons, let's see. Al Jazeera's Andrew Simmons, reporting from Kiev, said 34 incidents of violence reported by the Ukrainian government in several cities on Thursday. Skirmishes are common. Tensions at the border are high. As Western allies say Russia has deployed a huge potential invasion force. US intelligence has accused Moscow of seeking to create a pretext by faking an atrocity. And, something like this can work both ways. Both sides can create a faking an atrocity. In fact, they have a special name for that. They call it a false flag operation to, create this false atrocity to justify big action. And it's a very risky thing because, yes, of course, that can lead to war because there is an excuse for it, right? So this was the context, like a few days ago, leading up to what we see today, which is, declaration by Putin that he will recognize the two republics and that they will send in peacekeepers, because there are all these skirmishes going on. Now, knowing what you see here, though, at least on the face of it, the peacekeeping doesn't sound so absurd, right? Because prior to this, we didn't know that there are dozens of incidents, of skirmishes, of fighting. I'm sure people die. I'm sure people get hurt. But we had not heard of this. And now, thanks to Al Jazeera, I never thought they would say that, we get to know about that, right? And it is very difficult to find this kind of information on the mainstream news sites. So forgive me if I'm looking at websites that you don't normally look at, because I think they are the ones that can give me some information on this, right? Okay, so let me just take a moment to review something important, which is the Minsk Agreement. So after the fighting that started in 2014, there was a 2015 ceasefire deal between Kiev and Moscow that was supposed to offer a path to peace. Of course, everybody violated it, and it didn't work out. But yeah, Minsk won. There were two Minsk agreements. There was a 12-point ceasefire deal. Provisions include prisoner exchange, delivery of humanitarian aid, withdrawal of heavy weapons. It quickly broke down, violations by both sides. Then later on, they brought in more people. Seems like a lot of people involved. Russia, Ukraine, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and leaders of the separatist-held regions, Donetsk and Lugansk. Now, see, even in 2015, the leaders of these regions, Donetsk and Lugansk, were present for this peace agreement, but we hadn't really heard much about them even then. It was still Crimea, everything. So there were 13 points, one more than the original. Immediate comprehensive ceasefire, withdrawal heavy weapons, OSCE monitoring, dialogue on interim self-government, pardon, amnesty for fighters, exchange of hostages, humanitarian assistance, resumption of socio-economic ties, including pensions, Ukraine to restore control of state border, withdrawal of foreign armed formations, military equipment, mercenaries, constitutional reform in Ukraine, including decentralization with specific mention of Donetsk and Lugansk, elections in Donetsk and Lugansk, and all these things that were supposed to happen, we never heard anything about it. Obviously, naturally, it's not really our thing. I mean, it's a big, complex issue that doesn't affect us on a day-to-day basis. But it feels like, there's so much that we don't know. We're just being, as members of the public, I think it's just a true thing to say that we're just fed whatever scraps of information that fill the headlines and, justify and just give a simple, single unidimensional reason for action being taken. Like, okay, Putin is invaded. This is the justification for fighting back. And then, what constitutes an invasion? Oh, yeah, well, tanks went into here. So I think it behooves us to take a little effort and try to understand our world a little bit better. Maybe it helps us understand our own country, our own situations, right? Put things in a context. Now, let's move on a little bit. So why has the 2015 agreement failed to end fighting in eastern Ukraine? Major blockage has been Russia's insistence that it is not a party to the conflict and therefore is not bound by its terms. In general, Moscow and Kiev interpret the pact very differently to what has been dubbed as the Minsk conundrum. Ukraine sees the agreement as an instrument to re-establish control over the rebel territories. Yes. It wants some things like a ceasefire, control of the Russia-Ukraine border, elections in the Donbass, and a limited decentralization. Russia views the deal as obliging Ukraine to grant rebels in Donbass comprehensive autonomy and representation in central government. So yeah, it feels like it's something that they would definitely, interpret differently. And why was the agreement, so vague? Because sometimes that's just the best you can do. Sometimes it's just the best you can do, right? Guns are involved and people's lives are on the line. You sketch out these points that you hope everyone can agree to. Perhaps, both sides would rather leave the negotiating table and resume fighting. But if you're an honest broker, you sincerely want to bring peace, try to get them to agree to some points that adequately capture their, the wishes on both sides. And you hope that both parties will make a sincere effort to understand, more about what the other sides want from these points and deliver on them, and then both sides do the best that they can, right? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move on a little bit now. So I want to tell you that even before this, where things stand today, it feels to me that Russia has been making efforts to diffuse tensions. And let me explain what I mean here. See, December 17th, 2021, DW.com, Deutsche Welle, one of the largest news sites in Germany, reports Russia demands NATO leave Eastern Europe, limit missile deployment. Russia has released a series of security demands to NATO, including a veto on alliance's expansion. Now, it says it's a list of security demands. I think another way you can look at it is that it is the starting point for negotiations. Like, here's what we want. And of course, to position themselves as strong, they would call it demands. But you may or may not see it that way. You may look at it as a start of negotiations. Now, to really understand, or to really decide if you agree with that, we have to know what those demands are. So let's just see what they are. Russia on Friday released a series of demands. This was in December, yeah? And the NATO, if it is to restore relations, what does Russia want? An end to NATO military activity in Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. Because Russia has always been very nervous about NATO activity too close to its borders. No expansion of NATO membership, particularly to Ukraine. As I understand it, decades ago, there was a point. NATO leadership said that NATO will not expand an inch eastward, and that was a big deal. Not an inch eastward. If you look that up on Google, you'll see that there was this doctrine. I can't remember which U.S. president was responsible for it, but that was the promise, rather, made to Russia at the time, to say, we will not come within your sphere of influence, right? To respect the status quo, to say that NATO will not expand an inch eastward. And with, the talk of Ukraine joining NATO, which you may have come across, even like very lightly, very loosely, this appears to be a promise broken. So naturally, you can totally expect that Russia will be extremely nervous and react in a very bad way. And this is one of their basic demands, and which I understand is totally consistent with past policy. So if there has been a change in policy, if there was more negotiation with NATO to admit Ukraine, that is a change. And Russia is, being entirely reasonable to get all upset about that, because they were promised that this will not happen. They also don't want any intermediate or short-range missiles deployed close enough to hit the territory of the other side. Entirely reasonable. I mean, you may not like it, but if I was, if you were Russia, if I was running Russia or any country around that region, yeah, you would totally want. And they're not saying that, well, you can't do it, but I can do it. I reckon that this would apply both ways, right? Both of us, neither of us are going to do this. No military exercises of more than one military brigade in an agreed border zone. So nobody can have a military, more forces than one military brigade along the border between the two countries, say Russia and Ukraine. Neither Russia nor the United States can deploy nuclear weapons outside their national territories. So why is this important? Well, naturally, there will not be allowed, to have any. The United States cannot put nuclear weapons in Ukraine, for instance, to target Russia, or whatever NATO state that is closest to Russia, and say, I'll point it at Russia. Similarly, Russia promises that, they won't put it in Belarus or some other allied state of theirs. To me, when reading this, doesn't strike you as rather reasonable? Pretty reasonable. They want to return to a status quo that has existed for decades on the issue of NATO membership. They're saying, on both sides, we will not have military exercise of more than one military brigade. So if you want to have small-scale exercises, train up, keep your army strong in your territory, fine, but not too big. And I promise not to do the same. It feels like this is pretty sincere, because these are pretty specific, pretty detailed, and there are several of them. Now, if I was being unreasonable, I might say, okay, I demand, unilateral withdrawal of all NATO blah 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 troops. You have to go back to Western Europe or something, and that's totally unreasonable. And I think that would not be a sincere negotiation, right? But you can always, try to justify it somehow. But when it feels, when it is so specific and it feels so fair on both sides, it's not really feel like, like bullying. Feels that way, right? Who can really tell? But it doesn't feel totally unreasonable. And I think we have been kind of led to believe that it's rather unreasonable and that Russia is being extremely unreasonable. That doesn't come through when I look at this. What did Russia say? During this time, Deputy Foreign Minister told reporters the West need to start afresh in rebuilding relations. The line pursued by US and NATO over recent years, so to aggressively escalate the security situation, is absolutely unacceptable and extremely dangerous. Yeah, so it appears that Russia has been pretty specific with what they want. And if, like me, you read a lot of news, you may realize that doesn't really come through in the reports on Russia. Right, just get a minor quote from Putin, never the full story. Very unfortunate. So let's move on. We're almost at the end of this now, okay? Thank you for listening so far. Ukraine's crisis. Europe store gas high as prices soar. So this was in 2014. I presume this could also be applied today. I'm pretty sure that gas prices will soar. Now, why am I showing you this? It's because look at this map. Key gas pipelines in Ukraine. Did you know that we've probably heard that, Russia has gas pipelines, Russia's selling gas to Germany, but I bet you didn't know that the gas pipeline network is so extensive, and you can see that it's all crisscrossing, with a lot of source, entry points from Russia and exit points to Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and so on. That's really, really crazy. And what does this mean? I reckon this means that Ukraine has to be really, really strategically important to Russia. Ukraine absolutely cannot be an enemy of Russia, because if Ukraine is not friendly to Russia and they, break up all these pipes, then Russia is really screwed. 100%. Because Russia, natural gas accounts for a big part of Russia's economy. And you can see that, not only does Ukraine have a lot of its own natural gas, also it's a lot of these pipelines are going through Ukraine. I know that there are others going through other parts of other countries. Yeah, sorry. But this is key piece of information to understand, why Ukraine is so important in Russia. Not only is it historically important, it's economically important, and also important for security, right? Because Russia wants to resist the influence of NATO. So it seems like there's several good reasons for Russia to feel as Russia does, with this situation being what it is, with what Russia sees as, extensive Western influence in Ukraine, maybe perhaps even controlling parts of Ukraine, controlling Ukraine in some important ways. I do recall that there's Joe Biden's son has been on the board of a Ukrainian energy company. That one is actually true. You may look it up, like Biden's son, Ukraine, and you'll get the information on that. So Ukraine has a problem with corruption, and Ukraine is really important to Russia. And if Ukraine is not well influenced by Russia, then Russia will feel very unsafe and insecure. Now, however, one final thing. There's just one last thing I want to show you. And that is, let's see. Oh, not finally, actually the last thing. But here, look at this. Chinese firms. Oh, no. Sorry. That's the wrong one. Yes, you've already seen this. War fears grow as Vladimir Putin orders Russian forces to Ukraine breakaway regions as peacekeepers. Yes. Also reported by the Sydney Morning Herald. And Ukraine's president is the defiant, saying we are not afraid. He gave a 2 a.m. televised address on the country's security situation. Now, where is that? Oh, darn it. I think I can't find it. What I wanted to share, which I can't look up now, I don't want to, I want to just talk to everyone, talk to you, is that the Chinese authorities have not ordered an evacuation of their embassy staff. The United States has ordered their embassy staff to withdraw, but not China. And that's really remarkable because what does China know that the US doesn't? Or do they know something, in fact, that the US doesn't? The Chinese embassy has instructed their staff to, let's see, can I find it? No, I don't think so. Instructed their staff to store some food, store some water, just in case, there's a shortage, you can't get hold of food and water because of the crisis. But they've not left. But the US embassy staff have left. So is it because, somehow the Chinese are, bulletproof? No, of course not. But could it be because the US government wants to make a point and, emphasize the severity of the situation by withdrawing their staff? Possibly. To Ukraine's detriment, as we already know. President Zelensky is not happy about that. And do the Chinese fear, are they not fearful because they have their own evaluation of the security situation and they have judged it to be relatively safe, relative terms, perhaps? And maybe China's just very close to Russia and they got to ask the question, hey, do we need to get out of here? Maybe they don't know. So that's the situation now. Are you all caught up on Ukraine? I hope you at least feel that a little progress was made, because I certainly, looking into this was really interesting. But there's so many facets. I really honestly couldn't say that nothing bad will happen or that no war will take place, because it seems to be rather up in the air. I don't really know the situation because the motivations seem unclear, or at least they were unclear. They're slowly becoming more clear, but it seems to be so much posturing and negotiation and information coming from different sources that it's hard to know which is the most important and which is relevant. And it's actually quite fun because this is a real life situation. Fortunately, me watching this probably not in any danger, and we get to think it through as we process information coming through. This is something that's only possible with the internet, in the year 2022. And I think I appreciate that, and I try to make use of that. Okay, now, finally, I'd like to move on a little bit. Look at this. Chinese firms caught using spyware to track employee job hunting and identify staff who may be about to resign. It is a thing. There are several. Surveillance is more common in Chinese technology behemoths, according to employees, with many saying they believe they're being monitored by their employees even before the news report about the job hunting software. So generally, the computer you're using has some so-called security software installed that monitors all your actions. And this is a thing. I know that, that there are people who work as freelancers on some websites, like you may be helping people write copy, maybe doing design work for other companies. And one of these, called Odesk, the world's largest, most successful one, they can allow you to install a little program on your computer that will periodically take screenshots of your desktop. The reason being that they will collect these as proof that you're doing the work that you claim, because you may be hired to do work on an hourly basis, so you get paid per hour. And so how does the employer, your employer who hired you to do some work for a few hours, how do they know you're really working? Well, you allow them to take screenshots of your desktop so that they can verify, oh, you were doing the work. I can see it in these numerous screenshots that were taken. And so it's happening, you agree to it, and you get paid for it, and that's fine. What appears to be going on here is that might be that it's being done universally all the time, right? As long as you're on your work computer, work device, all your actions are logged, and maybe that is the problem. And so look here, generally the company you're using has some so-called security software installed that monitors all your actions, said a programmer who recently left ByteDance, the company that owns TikTok. So I can verify that this is indeed true of TikTok. That is, TikTok, the program itself, does actually log as many of your actions as possible, including at one point, this was very controversial, any content that you copy and paste, they will grab it. So if you copy text from anywhere and you happen to have TikTok active, TikTok will paste it and then store that pasted info, send it to the servers in China. And that was a big deal at the time that was reported. I don't know if you actually saw it, but that actually happened, and then TikTok apologized and they stopped doing it. But that is a reflection of the culture that leads to the same thing that you see here. That is, companies are using software, some say spyware, to track employee job hunting, identify staff who may be about to resign. And maybe, I guess, the implication is that you may get fired even earlier than you're ready to. You may be just hunting around for jobs, but you may get fired even earlier. Being spied on has become so prevalent in the tech sector that many people have accepted it as part of their normal working conditions. It appears that once you join a company, you have to accept such a fact, a TT employee explained. It has gradually become self-monitoring and reflected in my subconscious reaction to every action. Yeah. So, very unfortunate, but definitely a thing that is part of this tech culture in China. And if you are using tech, products from China, I guess, what you can expect that this happens. Like, is somebody trying to spy on you? Is the government trying to spy on you? Maybe not even then. It might just be the fact that the company that made your tech product, your software, your hardware, just viewed it as something that is acceptable and should be done, and they do it. And that is something to really take note of. I don't really use Chinese software. Yeah. Okay. So, last piece of news today. Final one. And coming over to Indonesia. Our neighbor Indonesia. Conglomerate Salim. So, Salim is this big company in Indonesia. They do everything. I believe, they make foods, they own real estate, all kinds of businesses. And the conglomerate's caught up in Indonesia's cooking oil crisis. So what is going on? The government is cracking down on alleged hoarders as record prices hit top palm oil country. So the world's largest producer of palm oil, Indonesia, is having a unusual crisis as allegations emerge of companies hoarding palm oil to sell at higher prices, including one affiliated with Salim Group, one of the country's largest conglomerates. Salim Invomas Pratama, a palm oil subsidiary of the conglomerate, and they make instant noodles, is under the spotlight after a local food task force discovered 1,000 tons of cooking oil during an impromptu inspection at the company's warehouse in Deli Serdang of North Sumatra. Police say it could be a case of hoarding. Why is that a big deal? Because right now, palm oil is extremely expensive, and it might be that they're trying to sell it. They hoarded it, they waited. When price went up, they start selling it. Here, the company claims the cooking oil produced in a factory in Deli Serdang is mainly used to supply Indofood's instant noodle factories in parts of Sumatra, which need 2,500 tons a month. So it's saying that this is not even meant for sale to consumers, so we're not hoarding, we're using it for ourselves. Nonetheless, share prices of three companies took a hit. So, international palm oil prices have been skyrocketing since late 2020 as coronavirus pandemic and mobility restrictions have disrupted production. So, there is an irony reported here in that even though Indonesia is the world's top producer of palm oil, there is a palm oil shortage, leading to a price ceiling on cooking oil. And That is extremely strange. Look at this. Yeah, the Indonesian Palm Oil Association said the country produced 46.89 million tons in 2021. Out of that, domestic consumption is 18.4 million tons. So Indonesia definitely produces more than enough for local production, but yet, there appears to be some kind of shortage, leading to price increases. Now, it has been reported that they use it for. There has been an increase in the kinds of usage that the palm oil is used for, including hand sanitizer, as I understand it. Let's see if I can find that. Yeah. So there has been an increase in demand. Production has been constricted, and thus prices have increased, even for cooking oil, which has been a source of great pain for Indonesians. And that's the context for this scandal. Now, why it is interesting is that I will tell you something that I learned personally. Did you know that these seed oils, vegetable seed oils, cooking oils derived from seeds like sunflower oil, safflower oil, canola oil, palm oil, I believe palm oil may or may not be one of them, have a lot of negative health effects. So it turns out that they oxidize extremely easily. They have to go through bleaching and high temperature cooking, which we are told is very bad for you. But nonetheless, is a way that these oils are produced. And so maybe if you're in Indonesia, allow me to recommend that why don't you try using animal oil, butter, coconut oil, animal, whatever it might be, like beef fat, as an alternative cooking oil. I've tried it. I've already switched, and I have to say that I do think my health is. I feel healthier, and so maybe this is the perfect opportunity as these oils get more expensive. Okay, wow, that feels like a long session, but I feel very satisfied. I hope that you found today's session also educational. I'm done. That's all the stuff I have for you today. Even it's even gotten darker as I've been speaking. So thank you all for your attention. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye bye.